Okay, in this lesson, we're going to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. You will have to solve quadratic equations when you get to Algebra 2, so it's a nice review. We're also going to be simplifying radicals because when you get irrational roots, you have to simplify your radicals for a simplified answer. So we're going to start with simplifying radicals, but just so you know what the goal of this lesson is, by the end of this lesson, you will be able to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula and express your answers in simplest form. So let's take a look just down here. So first we're going to simplify radicals. A radical is pretty much just a square root. If you look right here, these are your square roots, which means that all of the numbers on the left-hand side are your perfect squares. So 4 is a perfect square, 9, 16, 25. So on the left-hand side are your perfect squares, and on the right-hand side are your square roots. So a perfect square is 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. A perfect square is 9, and the square root of 9 is 3. A fact that we're going to be using today is written right here. Okay. You can take a number underneath a radical and you can separate it into the product of two separate numbers, and then you can go ahead and separate those two numbers into two different radicals. So that is a fact that you are allowed to use. You don't have to wonder why. You can test it with numbers if you'd like, but we're going to use that fact for simplifying our radicals. So if you look at the example, we have the square root of 50, and you can see here that they are, so we have the square root of 50, and then the first step is rewrite 50 as the product of 25 and 2. So you can see here I separated it by color. You can see that 25 times 2 is 50. So we've separated it. We've written 50 as a product of two numbers. There's a reason why we chose 25. What we're looking for is the largest perfect square that can go into 50, which I'll show you when we get to the practice. But then you're going to split up into two square roots. So now we have two radicals. We don't just have one. Then from there, you simplify the square root of 25, and the square root of 25 is 5. So your answer is 5 radical 2. So what that means is the square root of 50 simplified is equal to 5 radical 2. All right, so now what am I talking about with this largest perfect square and all of that? If you take a look at radical 72, we want to split this up strategically. We're not just going to pick any two factors. Our goal is to find the largest perfect square that divides into or that goes into the number. Okay, so if we're looking at radical 72 and we're looking at our square roots, right? And our perfect squares. Obviously, a larger number is not going to be able to go into 72. So we want to kind of find where 72 is. So 72 is between 64 and 81. So we're going to try all of these numbers that are less than 72. So 72 divided by 64, you're not going to get a whole number. You're looking for a whole number. That means that it's a factor. So if you do 72 divided by 64, you'll get 1.125. So that's not a whole number. Then we're going to move down to 49 because 64 is not it. So 72 divided by 49. And that is equal to 1.469 something. Okay, so not a whole number, not a factor. So it's not 49. 72 divided by 36 is equal to 2. So that means that 36 is a factor, then 36 times 2 is 72. So we're going to take our radical, and we're going to split that up, and we're going to say that this is equal to 36 times 2. Then we're going to split that up into two separate radicals, 36 and 2. And then finally we simplify the square root of 36, and that's equal to 6, and bring down the radical 2, and that's your answer. All right. So you would want to do the same thing for 80. If you divide, so let me get rid of all of this. Oops. We're going to get rid of all that there. So now the square root of 80. 80 is less than 81, so we're going to start right here. Okay. So 80 is here, so we're going to do the same process. We're going to divide by all of the numbers that are less than it. And you would find, I'm not going to show you all of that work, that 80 divided by 16 is equal to 5. So we would separate this as the square root of 16 times 5. We're going to split that up into two radicals. Radical 16 times radical 5. And then from there we simplify radical 16, which is equal to 4, and bring down radical 5. Okay. So remember, it's strategic. You don't want to pick any two factors. I know that off the bat someone would want to say, well, radical 80 is equal to radical 8 times radical 10, because 8 times 10 is 80. But neither 8 nor 10 are perfect squares, so that doesn't get you anywhere. So you don't want to do that. You're looking specifically for the largest perfect square. Okay. So that's simplifying radicals, and now we're going to get to solving quadratics. We're going to use the quadratic formula. You know, it's definitely possible for you to use other methods. At some point, you're going to use factoring and completing the square, but I'm going to stick to the quadratic formula for now, just for the sake of certain types of questions. So solving quadratic equations, it's very important that you recognize this here, this whole thing, the quadratic formula. It's very important that you see that it has to be in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. If your equation is not written like that, you cannot use the quadratic formula. So what we want to do is we want to find the values of a, b, and c because we're going to substitute and evaluate this equation here. So the first thing you want to do is make sure it's in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form. So, you know, if you were to even write that above here, you can see you have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So that's good. It's already in the form, so we don't have to change anything. So here, a is equal to, let me do this color-coded here for you. All right, so a, you can see that there's nothing here, but you should always know that there's a 1 there. So a is equal to 1. B is equal to 6. And C is equal to 7. All of my numbers are positive. I don't have to worry about negatives for this one. So now we're going to just take our formula and we're going to substitute. So x is equal to negative. The negative is part of the formula, so you have to include it in when you evaluate. So negative b, which is 6, plus or minus the square root. And I'm just going to do this. This is something that you should do too. It's very helpful if you just open up all your parentheses. So now we just have to fill in our a, b's, and c's. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared, so b is 6, minus 4 times a is 1, times c is 7, all divided by 2 times a, which is 1. So now from here, it's all just about simplifying. I'm going to show you the best way to do that. We're first going to take a look right here. What we have here is a negative times a positive, so that's going to become negative 6, plus or minus. Now, what's underneath the radical, and you're not going to include the radical in the calculator, what's underneath the radical goes in the calculator. So we're going to put in our calculator 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7, and that will give us an 8. So we come back here and we're just going to put radical 8. And that's all divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Now, this is an answer, but it's not the most simplified version of your answer. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this radical 8, and you're going to do what we did before. We're going to simplify it. So radical 8. This one is a small number, so it's not so difficult. When doing this, I like to list my perfect squares. So 1, 4, 9, 16. We know that we're stopping at 8, so we don't have to worry about these. So we're going to say 8 divided by 4 is 2. So that was an easy one, but we're going to split this up as radical 4 times radical 2. And then we're going to simplify radical 4, which is 2. So this is 2 radical 2. So now we're going to replace radical 8 with 2 radical 2 divided by 2. So now the very last thing that you're going to do is simplify the fractions. So what you have here are 2 different fractions. So we're going to separate this. We have negative 6 divided by 2 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 radical 2. Okay, so all I did was I took this fraction and I took this fraction and I separated them. So we have this one and this one. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. 2 divided by 2 is 1. I don't need to write that because it's multiplied by radical 2. So this is our most simplified answer. Okay? So that's number 1. Number 2, if you take a look at it, I'm going to write it bigger so we can work with it. We have 8x squared plus 8x plus 3 is equal to 6. Remember, the very first thing you want to check is it in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 form? So if I just write that small above here, ax squared plus bx, so far so good, plus c, so far so good, equals 0. Well, no, 6 is not 0. So we have to make this equal to 0. So all you're going to do is you're going to take this 6 and you're going to subtract it because it's positive. Remember, if it's not written, it's positive. And we're going to line it up with its like term. And now we're going to have 8x squared plus 8x minus 3 is equal to 0. And now we have the form that we need. So once we are in that form, we can go ahead and find our a, b's, and c's. So a is equal to 8. B is equal to 8 also. Notice I included the plus because it's positive. And C is equal to negative 3. Okay, that negative is important. So we are going to go ahead and do the same thing. X is equal to negative. I'm going to open up all my parentheses first. B squared minus 4 times 8 times C all over 2 times A. You don't have to do that. I think it's a good thing to do. I think it's very helpful. But I'm doing it just because it's easier to go back and forth with the colors. So we're going negative b, so b is 8, plus or minus the square root of b squared, b is 8, minus 4 times a is 8, times c. c is negative 3. All divided by 2 times a, which is 8. So again, we're just going to simplify. We have a negative times a positive, so that's negative 8 plus or minus. And remember now what's underneath the radical, we're going right to our calculator. So we're going to go and we're going to put in just what's under the radical. Remember, you don't include the radical. So it's 8 squared minus 4 times 8 times negative 3. And that gives us 160. So we come back and fill in 160. All divided by 16. 2 times 8 is 16. So we're going to do that same thing. We're going to take our radical 160 and we're going to simplify it. So you are going to practice simplifying radicals on Delta Math. I don't really want to go through this whole process of simplifying it, but you would find that this is equal to the square root of 16 times the square root of 10. And then the square root of 16 is 4. Okay, so if you're not sure how I got this, go back and actually do the process. That's okay for you to do that. You can pause this video at any time. X is equal to negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 4 radical 10 divided by 16. Also remember, if you're watching this video and you have a question, you're not sure what I did, just go ahead and email me or message me. I can easily respond to you and explain. So what we have here, we're going to simplify our fractions again. So we're separating this into 2 separate fractions. X is equal to negative 8 divided by 16 plus or minus 4 divided by 16 times radical 10. Now simplifying fractions, you're just finding a common the greatest common factor. In this case, the greatest common factor of 8 and 16 is 8. So 8 divided by 8 is 1, and 16 divided by 8 is 2. Whoops, not 12. 2. And then the greatest common factor of 4 and 16 is 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 16 divided by 4 is 4. So your answer is negative 1/2 plus or minus 1/4 times radical 10. If you don't know how to simplify fractions, you can do this in the calculator. So we're going to go to the calculator and say negative 8 divided by 16. And you get this decimal here. And then you're just going to hit math, enter, enter, and it'll give you your fraction. So same thing, if we do 4 divided by 16, you get a decimal, hit math, enter, enter, it'll give you a simplified fraction. Okay. Last one. Okay, so again, we are looking for ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. You can see right off the bat, this doesn't start with ax squared. So we have to fix that. So we have 10x plus 13 is equal to negative x squared minus 9. Typically, what you want to remember is that you want your x squared to be positive. So if it's negative, you want to move whatever's on that side. If it's positive, you can move what's on the other side. So my point being, if this were a positive x squared, you could move, I'm just showing you this as an example because of if you come across it. If x squared was positive, you would move this to this side, so you would do it like this because this is positive. But because in our case it is negative, we're going to move everything that's on the right side. So opposite of negative x squared, we're going to add it. We're going to line it up with its like term. It doesn't have a like term here, so we have to keep it by itself. And then plus 9, we're going to line up with its like term. That's 13. This will cancel out. And we just simplify, bring everything down. So we have x squared plus 10x plus 22 is equal to 0. So now we have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. All right, so one last time. There's an invisible 1 here, so a is equal to 1. B is equal to 10. And C is equal to 22. X is equal to negative B plus or minus B squared times A times C all over 2 times A. So here we go, negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared, that's 10, minus 4 times A times C all over 2A, 2 times 1. Okay, so this here is a negative times a positive. That hasn't been different at all this video. If A were negative, if B were negative, you would have a negative times a negative, and that would become a positive 10. So just keep that in mind if that comes across, or if that comes up. Plus or minus the square root. We have 10 squared. 10. Notice that I'm putting this in parentheses every time, just in case it's negative. You want to make sure you do that. Minus 4 times 1 times 22, and that is 12. All divided by 2 times 1 is 2. So one more time, we're going to simplify radical 12. Oops. We're going to simplify this radical 12. Hopefully you know that there's not many factors of 12, and one of those is a perfect square. That's radical 4, and it's 4 times 3. Square root of 4 is 2. So this is 2 radical 3, negative 10 plus or minus 2 radical 3 divided by 2. One last thing to do, we're going to separate our fractions, and x is equal to negative 10 divided by 2 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 radical 3. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. We don't have to write that because it is multiplied by this radical 3. And that is your simplified answer. Remember, if you have any questions, email me, message me on Google Chat, send me a private message on Google Classroom. Just somehow get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to clarify any part of this video for you.